So we need to prepare the discussion questions as well. And the opening question that I asked for the small group discussion question I want to pose to you now is, how tired do you feel right now? Yeah. How would you rate your tiredness? Um, and we all know, I think, like, and I'm mindful of this is Sunday morning. Like, presumably you'd woken up like just a few hours ago, so it's not a physical tiredness, and I think we all know that, right? That there is something deeper, something inside, something in our souls that is just aching and tired, um, and I want to explore that a little bit today. Um, as you all know, we're going through A.W. Tozer's book, Pursuit of God, in our current sermon series. And Tozer, it's a wonderfully, so if you haven't before, like, or are not doing so now, I do highly recommend this book. It's a little over 100 pages, it's very short. And in it, like, Tozer kind of breaks down, like, what it means to really pursue a relationship with God. You know, he talks about not just our pursuit of God, but God's pursuit of us. Over the course of the sermon, we talked about what it means to let go of idols and to remove the veil to be able to really perceive God in his truest form. Right? We talked about gazing upon God. And as he nears the end of this book, we have 2 chapters left in this book. So we have today, and next week is going to be on the sacrament of living. As he nears the end of the book, Tozer writes this chapter that's titled Meekness and Rest. And it's just such a good title, I just plagiarized it directly. And he wanted to talk about what it means to be meek and what it means to rest. Because Tozer understood, just as Jesus understood, what it's like for us to be sitting here in this church on Sunday today, feeling tired, feeling weary. And Tozer wanted to speak to that. And so we're gonna dive into this. Tozer opens with a discussion about the Sermon on the Mount, right? And it starts off with the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the so-and-so because they are blah, blah, blah. And he kind of talks about how Jesus said the Beatitudes really as a negative image of what the human condition is like, right? He says, blessed are the poor in spirit. And if we look at just humanity as a whole, the goal for most of us is not to be poor in spirit. The goal for most of us is to be confident, to be strong-willed, to be like persistent, to be ambitious. That's what we find, right? That's the kind of qualities and traits that tends to succeed in modern society. You know, Jesus talks about blessed are those who mourn. And we think really about like just how often do we mourn unless like someone passed away, something really bad happens. Generally, what we pursue is not mourning, but pleasures. You know, Jesus talks about how we should hunger. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And instead, like most of us, you know, we hunger and thirst after influence and material wealth. That is just, broadly speaking, the human condition. And Jesus is speaking against that, right? And so against that backdrop of this is what humanity is, Jesus speaks into it, and he makes this next claim, right? His 5th beatitude is this: blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek. They will inherit the earth. It sounds a little strange, doesn't it? Like, what does that mean? Like, what does meek mean? What do you mean inherit the earth? That sounds... And I would suggest to you that the reason why it sounds so strange to us to hear this phrase, to hear the sentence, blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth, is because we think as the world do. there's parts of us that have not been fully transformed by God yet, right? Meekness, the word meek, it's a highlighted red there. That word in the original Greek is a Greek word called praos. 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 And it follows the basic English definition, like humble, to be gentle, to be, has some connotations of being really easily imposed upon. It has connotations of weakness, right? As you kind of think about that, like those words and those phrases, this is not a word that's used often in the Bible. There's like 4 instances. This is one of them, right? One other place where it shows up is where Peter gives advice to Christian wives and suggests that, rather than focusing on beautifying yourself with makeup, with hairstyles, with fashionable clothing, with jewelry and blings, he suggests that wives beautify themselves with a gentle, a quiet spirit, a praos spirit. And lest you think this is like a sexist thing, that this is only for the women, the exact same word is used in Matthew's, where it kind of describes, like an Isaiah prophecy, it talks about, to the daughters of Zion, see your king, King Jesus, comes to you, gentle, praos, riding on a donkey. Jesus himself is described using that exact same language. So this is not something unique to the ladies in the room. This is something that is meant to be embodied even by Jesus and by extension all of us, right? Because after all, Jesus called us to like, blessed are the meek. If you're meek, like I am meek, if you're praos, like I am praos, you will be blessed. You will inherit the earth. So meekness, it means humble. It means lowly. It means submissive. It means obedient. Now, why would, and right off the bat, it already sounds strange to us because we've been taught that the way you get ahead in life, the way the world teaches us to get ahead in life is what? To be weak? No. It's survival of the fittest, Like, it's the survival by strength. It's competition. It's the competitive edge. It's ambition. That's how you get ahead in this lifetime, according to the world. And which is why this phrase, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, sounds so dissonant within us. It sounds strange because it goes against everything we've been taught so far. So let's unpack this a little bit. Like, what exactly did Jesus mean? And Jesus sometimes will kind of throw out a concept or a word and not define it right away. And Tozer makes this joke and says that, Jesus kind of like kept you guessing for a couple of chapters, and he gets back to it eventually in Matthew 11, where he talks about, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened. Does that sound like you? I feel it. This spoke to me. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle, I am praos, I am meek and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So here, Jesus is defining meekness for us a little bit more. And he doesn't do it explicitly. He doesn't say this meekness equals this. What he does is he sets up meekness as the antidote to weariness, as the antidote to burden, as the solution to what we are feeling this morning. If you sat down and you thought, yes, Edward, I do feel tired. And it's not because I didn't sleep enough last night. So this then begs the question, right? Where is this tiredness coming from? Where is this burden? What is this burden that Jesus is talking about? I mean, he's using a physical imagery of cattle. You know, a yoke is like this tool that you place on cattle so that it could pull and help you plow the field. He's not talking about physical hard labor. You know, even though the word he used, like burden, that word implies like carrying a load so heavy that you're almost to the point of being crushed by it. You know, he's not talking about physical fatigue and tiredness. Because if it was, he would just say, go take a nap. It's very easy. That's what I would do. But I think you know what Jesus means when he says weary and burdened. Right? It's not something that a nap would fix. Which is why the solution he proposed was not take a nap, but take my yoke upon you. Be humble, be meek, be proud with me. And so what is that burden? Let's name it exactly. What is that burden? Jesus is describing a burden that is applicable to both the rich and the poor, the young and the old, the men and the women. It's a burden that really is carried by all of humanity. It's the burden of work, of missed deadlines, of relationships, of stress and pressure. It's the burden of anxiety and worries about the future. It is the burden of wanting to meet expectations and failing to do so. It's the burden of just undesired obligations for family, of duty, responsibility. It's the burden of worry. It's all of these things. Right? There's a Disney movie called Encanto that my family was just in love with for ages and ages. And there's this song in there where one of the characters is down there, named Luisa, who's like a strong woman, and she kind of like carries both the physical and the figurative load of the family on her shoulders, and it's just feeling more and more crushed under that weight, right? And like I think so many of us could identify with that feeling of just kind of cracking under the surface pressure. Like you maintain a calm facade, but your eyes are twinging a little bit and you're being crushed under the weight of responsibility. That is, at least in part, I think what Jesus means when he says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy burdened." I think that there's another piece as well, though, that all of these things, and ultimately even like beyond this, the burden that Jesus is talking about at its root is pride. It is pride. Now, why do I think so? Because remember, Jesus started off this by saying, like, come to me, those of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Right? And what was the rest he proposed? What was the remedy that Jesus is proposing? It's meekness. It's meekness. So logically, what's the opposite of meekness? It's pride. So pride is a thing that is causing us to be tired and weak. At least that's what I think Jesus means. All right? Follow that logic, right? Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened. You're weary and heavy burdened by something. What is that something? That something, the thing you need to do about it is to be humble. Well then, it's the opposite. It's pride. Pride causes us to feel weary. Pride causes us to feel tired. Pride burdens us. And Jesus' remedy for that is his meekness. Now, remember, Tozer began this chapter by claiming that one of the problems of this world is that the world tends to take the beatitude and flip it on its head, so that, like, rather than being poor in spirit, we would We want to pursue, we want to be arrogant and proud, we want to be ambitious. Rather than hungry and thirsting after righteousness, we tend to pursue and hunger and thirst after material things or influence or accomplishments. Like we are, at its core, a sinful people because we are the exact opposite of what Jesus says those who are blessed ought to be. We are the exact mirror image of the Beatitudes, right? And the world, meekness is no different, right? The world and Satan, by extension, claims that pride is a good thing. It is good to take pride in your work. It is good to have self-confidence. It's good to be proud. It is good to be ambitious. Those are all, like, if we're honest, like, those are all positive words in our mind, right? Yet this wasn't how we were designed. We were designed for meekness. We were designed to not be our own gods, but to worship and follow a God who is our creator. We were not designed to idolize ourselves. And so there's a picture down on the bottom left. Does anyone recognize what that image is? It's from Greek mythology. Yeah, there's a character called Narcissus. There you go. There's a character in Greek mythology called Narcissus who was a hunter and wherever. And the rumor has it that he was so beautiful that he would make like your favorite BTS singer like look like nothing. He was so beautiful that like men and women can't help but falling in love with him. Like he was just that beautiful. And he was like cursed, like almost cursed with speed. He kept having to reject people one after the other and like kept saying, nope, sorry, nope, 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 nope. Until one day, while he was out hunting, he found the love of his life when he went for a drink from his water. And the love of his life was his own reflection. He gazed down into the pool and saw himself and said, oh my. Hey, how you doing? It's silly to kind of think of that mental imagery. But I mean, I think we understand like implicitly like what this story symbolizes, right? That we have a problem with like, I think, loving ourselves a little too much. of just loving ourselves a little too much. And what do I mean by that? It means that we put ourselves at the center where God ought to be. It means that we aim to seek praise and glory for ourselves rather than praise and glory for God. It means that the actions and thoughts and words that drive us is me-centered rather than God-centered. There's a way to do Christian, Christ-centered self-care, where you take rest when you need to, where you express yourselves in a healthy way, where you communicate nicely. That's nothing wrong with that. But this is about idolatry, and this is something that we all inherently struggle with. The labor of self-love is a heavy one indeed. So I want to just posit to you, like, I'm not me, Tozer wants to posit to you, like 3 examples where pride can get in the way of things, where pride can leave like feelings of burden, right? The first is like our tendency to compare ourselves against like our neighbors or people around us. The second, we have a tendency to want to defend ourselves against insults and critiques. And the third is like we have a tendency to want to like cover up and hide any flaws, any sins, anything that is undesirable parts of us. Like we have a tendency to hide that. And Tozer posits that like these are all examples of what it is like to live an idolatrous life where the object of your worship is not God but yourself. And it is a heavy, heavy burden. So let's take a look at these one by one. Starting with just the pride in comparing yourself. Like, what does that look like? What does that look like? So whether you're aware of it or not, like, we are constantly measuring ourselves against others. Right? And we're trained to this. Like, you think about just the idea of grades in, like, when you're a little kid in school, you get given grades. Why? So that you could be rank ordered against others. You think about SATs and how the way you get into college so you can advance your careers in life is you compete against others. You measure yourself against others. And so it's no wonder when you graduate from college, you get out, you find work, you start comparing yourself against your peers in terms of what jobs you do, in terms of what benefits you have, in terms of your salaries, perhaps. And like, we're taught that this is just like good, marketing, and it's fine. But there's this constant drive to compare, right? You could, like, it's the old adage of keeping up with the Joneses, keeping up with your neighbor. The neighbor gets a nicer car, you get a nicer car. The neighbor gets a nice lawn, you get a nice lawn. The neighbors get, like, fruit trees planted. Oh, no, we go to that Home Depot, we get those fruit trees. We keep up. We at least want to maintain that like facade of, like, we are doing well. We're doing well, because, like, we don't want to be caught looking like we're lacking for anything, right? So whatever trait you think of that you're most proud of in yourself, you're most likely noticing how you compare against others in that, right? You're either feeling a little dose of self-satisfaction every time you see others who are inferior to you, or you feel a tiny little twinge of jealousy when you find someone who's better at it than you. And so, just to illustrate it, I am a dad. I am also an educator in early childhood education. And so, like, one thing that, like, I can kind of say that, like, I'm pretty proud of in myself is, like, my ability to raise good kids and to teach kids. And so, like, I mean, I put an effort with, like, Chloe, for example, in reading. Like, we read almost every night, and we read stories, and we put an effort to train her and teach her. We put an effort to train her how to write and all of these things. And so every time, like, we have, like, a chance to, like, look at how Chloe's doing, like, I notice how she does against her classmates. Yeah, and I see some smiles. Like, yes, you guys, I think people know what I mean. And you can just imagine, like, this translates into piano lessons. This is going to translate in the future into, like, I'm going to compare. Because this is something that I take, pride in. It's not just that my kids' accomplishments are my own and I'm living vicariously through, but my own reputation as a parent and as an educator is on the line. And so when I see Chloe write more beautifully than her peers, like, yeah, go me. I mean, Chloe. You guys, you're laughing. You guys know what I'm talking about. And if you see, like, Chloe stumbling over words, doing, like, a recital or, like, reading, and it's like, and her peers are reading much better than her. Oh, come on, Chloe, come on, get it. Okay, not just because, like, I want her to succeed, because, like, on some levels, this is my pride I'm talking about, right? This is my identity. So why do we do this? This is symptomatic, really, of a heart that measures its worth against what we own and what we've accomplished. That's what's going on here, right? We measure our worth by what we own and what we have accomplished instead of God. And if we're less than others, it's going to feel like our worth is diminished, right? Now, here's the thing. Society encourages this. It's not hard to see why, right? I mean, it's, again, like, the whole idea of, like, competing against each other with grades, competing each other to kind of, like, just the American economy is kind of driven on this engine of, like, we want to try to earn more so we can buy more, so we can, fund that economy and just keep it driving, keep it moving, keep it growing, so the trends can go up, up, and up. And so society wants us to be competitive. That's capitalism at its core is competition. We're taught to compete against others and to want what we don't have so that we keep the engine going. Now, why is this harmful? I mean, you can kind of already tell from my example with Chloe, like what that could do, but why is this harmful? It's harmful because we weren't created to get our worth from what we own and what we accomplish. We're created to derive our worth from God and God alone. These things can give us a temporary sense of happiness that fades with time or really only lasts until we're beaten. Right? That new car that you feel so happy about, that you're so proud of, that you're like, yeah, I made it. This is the Tesla or that fancy minivan. It's like brand new minivan. Like we got a Pacifica a few years back. I was really happy with it. Until you come across a better minivan, right? Or not even then. Sometimes you never come across a better minivan, but the joy that comes with owning and accomplishing, we know that it's a temporary high. And we know that it's addictive because we're going to keep chasing after it. So it's a constant, never-ending struggle for identifying your own worth because you're always gonna. There's always someone better than you, and you're always gonna want better, nicer things. And so, as long as your worth is based on those two things of what you own and what you accomplish, you're never gonna be satisfied. There's pride also in defending. Now, what do I mean by this? It means that we have a tendency to take offense easily, to jump to defend ourselves when we're being insulted or we're being critiqued somehow. There's a tendency for us to like jump out and say, no, that's not fair. Like I'm not what you say I am. Let me explain what I am. And we get into the sparring match, right? And the one example that I thought of is in working here at the preschool, the church preschool, one of the things Pastor Jane is constantly reminding me of is like, don't put yourself in too much. Remember, your role is not to like be in there. Like your role is the director, and there's like jobs and responsibilities that's tied to that role. And she would constantly remind me this every time I try to insert myself to, do things like to kind of support the teachers. And I'll be honest, like I get a little offended by that. I get a little upset by that. I get like, I'm like, can you stop doing that, Pastor Jane? Like, let me decide what my priorities are. Let me decide what I can or cannot do, or what I should or should not do. Like, I will decide like what's appropriate and what's not. And it took me a while to really realize that like Jane is not doing this to be like a bossy boss. She's doing this out of love. She's doing it as like not just as a boss, but as my pastor and as my friend, and wants me to, set appropriate boundaries, wants me to take care of myself, wants me to kind of do the work that I know I need to do as well, and make sure I have space and time to do those things. But here's the thing. I jumped to defend myself. And I kind of had to tease out why that is, because like, well, why am I so angry whenever James gives me one of these talks? Why am I so angry? Well, it's because like I feel like I'm being like taken care of. I feel like you're acting like my mom. Why is that a bad thing? Well, because like I'm being told that like I should or should not do these things. Like, well, why is that a bad thing? Well, because it implies that you think I'm incapable. And you start entangling all of these like threads in this ball of anger that like we all feel at times. Because like I think we all like have those moments in whether it's in our marriage or with our kids or with our colleagues where we feel angry at them. It's like, well, why are we feeling angry? Why are we feeling insulted? And if you pull on those threads, so often what comes out at the center of that, the core of that, is like we feel like who we are, we feel like our identity, we feel like our capability, we feel like who we are as a person is under attack, right? And we rush to defend that. We rush to defend that. Because that's the object of our worship. That's us. Like me. Look how capable I am. Who are you to question how capable I am? Stop mothering me. You know, that at its core is pride talking. It's my identity as someone who is capable, someone who is able to take care of himself, someone who is whatever it is. You want to whatever it is that I take pride in myself, that thing is under attack. Right? Now, society, here and there, that society wants us to be able to take criticism and feel, self-assured. But there's also kind of this idea of standing up for yourself, standing up for what you believe in, standing up for what you're worth, and being confident in yourself and holding fast to those things. Even if it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, you hold fast to it and don't let anyone decide your worth. There's something in there that's a little bit toxic, right? Where society will twist that a little bit and take the confidence that God meant for us to have. Because God wants us to be confident, but they twist it to be be confident in yourself. Be confident in yourself. Don't let anyone tell you what you can or cannot do. Now, why is that harmful? Because it makes it very, very, very hard for anyone to speak truth into your life. Right? Never mind God, who very rarely appear in burning bushes and speak to you. Your own mother would have a hard time giving you even advice that's good advice, even advice that's given very well-meaningly out of love. They just want to help you. You're not going to be able to hear it because you're too busy trying to protect that. Right? And so you wrap it up in these strings and tangles of anger to defend yourself. So pride can manifest in defending yourself. Right? The third and last one, pride in covering. This is fairly straightforward. What does this mean? It means we hide our flaws and our sins for fear of being judged by others. Should it be exposed? We have the classic Adam and Eve. Now, Adam's doing two different kinds of covering here. One is an actual fig leaf, right? And the other thing he's doing here in this picture, and this artist illustrated really well, he's doing what? He's blaming. He's shifting the blame to someone else, right? That's the other way. And so, I didn't have a specific example about this, but how often when you are in an argument or confrontation with someone where they're saying something bad about you, rather than sit down and have a dialogue about that, it was well, how can I grow? Thank you for that. How can I learn from it? No, we say oh yeah, well, you didn't put you didn't take out the trash last night. Well, you didn't, blah, blah, blah. And so we argue back and forth, or we blame, or we shift the blame and responsibility off, right? And so this can take the form again of just pretending to be who we're not, pretending we're more okay than we are, pretending we're more healthy than we are, pretending we are less sinful than we are. Or it can take the form of I'm just going to shift the blame away from myself. Or again, you do that game with, you sometimes do with spouses, where you kind of fire back and forth on each other. Why do we do this? Well, because our identity is found in how others view us, right? It's because that's what it means to be worshipped. Ideally, you're not just here sitting worshiping yourself. Ideally, you want everyone else to worship the same thing. You want everyone else to acknowledge how capable you are. You want everyone else to acknowledge how wonderful of a husband or wife you are. You want everyone else to acknowledge what a wonderful employee you are. And so you are going to cover up your weaknesses. You're going to pretend. You're going to mask up the parts that you don't want people to see, rather than addressing it, because it is so important that no one sees those weaknesses. And so you're going to cover it up and hide. And at its core, this is pride. And this is harmful because it's going to hurt our trust in others and our trust in other people as well. right? And their trust in us. And it's going to make us just really incapable of really ever acknowledging wrongdoing. It's going to make us impossible for us to acknowledge sins in our lives, right? Let alone work on it. And so into all of this, Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. Right? Jesus says, take my yoke. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened. I will give you rest. So we've defined the burden. We've identified, like, this is why we feel tired. Like, in addition to just the stress of work and family, we have pride going on, and it just drains us day after day after day of trying to protect this thing. And Jesus says, like, I know you're tired. I don't want you to be weary. Take my yoke on you. Take my yoke upon you. So what does that mean? What does it mean to take Jesus' yoke upon you? Well, Paul gives us a hint in Philippians 2. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ, who being very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, take on the very nature of a servant, and being made in human likeness, and found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So the word meekness didn't show up in this passage, but you can see traces of it here, I hope, right? Because in Jesus' obedience to God the Father's plan, Jesus was meek. In refusing to raise himself as a human to the dignity of God, Jesus was meek. In taking on the nature of a servant when he is the king, Jesus was meek. So it stands to reason then that for us to take on Jesus' yoke of meekness, it means that we take on the servant's nature like Jesus. It means we're obedient to God like Jesus. And it means lowering ourselves before God like Jesus. It means to see God as being greater than us and more worthy of our worship. This is Jesus' answer to those of us who are weary and heavy burdened. This is Jesus' promised rest. Why is that restful? Why? Like, how could that be the solution to what we all feel? Why should obedience and lowering ourselves and just serving, taking on the servant's nature, why would that make us more rested? Jesus promised those of us who are weary and burdened by the weight of pride and self-idolatry that true rest can be found in his meekness. God's rest is found in the worship of our Creator rather than the created. In acknowledging God as the God of your life, you let go of the burden of being your own God. It's that plain and simple. The reason why we feel so tired all the time, at least in part, is because we're trying to be our own gods. We are trying to worship ourselves. We're trying to glorify ourselves, and all of our efforts is going to spend in raising up this, like the parts of us that we're most proud of. And it is exhausting because that is not the object we're meant to worship. In acknowledging God as God and worshiping God, Jesus himself, you let go of that burden. You don't have to be God anymore. God will be God for you. He can carry that weight, not us. And so in letting God be God in our lives, rather than try to be God ourselves. In worshiping God instead of worshiping ourselves, we can let go of the stress of work and family. We can let go of the anxiety over the future in knowing that God is your provider. If you lose your job, if you lose your health, you know that God is your provider. You are not in charge over that. You are not in charge of whether or not your family eats this month. God is. And if you truly believe that, if you truly grasp that, what a relief. You don't have to carry that weight. God will carry that weight for you. If you can let God be God in your life, if you can let go of your desire to worship yourself, the pride of comparing yourself to others goes away. Because you find your worth solely in God's opinion of you rather than other people's opinions of you. You don't have to compare yourself. You don't have to outdo your neighbors. You don't have to get that nicer car. You can be content with what you have. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to cover up. Like, there's nothing you need to hide because your weaknesses are known by the creator of the heavens and earth. And that just matters so much more than what other people think about you. Like, you know you're broken. You know you're weak. You know that you're sinful. The God of the universe knows that. You know he knows that. What does it matter if others find out? And in freeing you to be vulnerable like that, you free yourself up to grow, to be sanctified by God. And so the blessed rest that comes when we accept ourselves for what we are and cease to pretend to be our own God, God assures this rest for us with this blessed, it is finished. In dying on the cross, he allowed us to take rest. He allowed us to let go of this God and accept the true God in our lives. We no longer have to earn. We no longer have to scrape. We no longer have to work at glorifying ourselves. Because it is all grace. It is all mercy. And Jesus calls it his yoke because he's holding one end of that yoke and you're on the other side and you're going to pull it together. My yoke is light because I am doing all the heavy lifting. You just have to be along with me. Now, to wrap up, I promise I'm almost done. You might be really uncomfortable right now with what I'm saying. All right? Again, like we talked about, we've been taught from early childhood to compete, to have ambition, to have drive. And there's at least two objections that the world may have to a life of Christian humility and meekness, right? At least two. Probably more, but I just want these two to serve as an illustration of what a meek life should look like. We've been taught to be strong and independent, to be ambitious, and what Tozer says is that the meek man is not a human mouse afflicted with a sense of his own inferiority. He knows he is weak and helpless, as God declares him to be, but he knows at the same time that he is, in God's sight, of more importance than angels. In himself, nothing. And in God, everything. To be meek is not to be weak. It's not to be a pushover. It is not like to be unhappy all the time. It is not to be... And in fact, like those are some of the things and traits that we tend to attribute to meekness. And the world is going to object to, you want me to be a Christian, and that means I need to be meek. Doesn't that mean that I'm supposed to be weak and timid and like just shy and fearful all the time? Like I cannot talk in public. That's not meekness. The world thinks that. Because the world thinks that the best source of courage is self-confidence, having faith in yourself, knowing that you're a powerful individual, a strong woman or strong man. You are capable. That's the world's version of courage. But we're not called to self-reliance. We're called to God-reliance. We're not called to self-sufficiency, but relying on God for our daily bread. This is not... Isaiah put it really well. In Isaiah 51, God says, I am he who comforts you. Who are you that you are afraid of man who dies and have forgotten the Lord your maker? True meekness unlocks a new kind of confidence, not in yourself and your abilities, but true confidence in knowing that God, the creator of heaven and earth, is on your side. And if he is for us, who can be against us? It does not make you weak. It does not make you fearful. It makes you to be as brave as you need to be to accomplish God's will in this life. Another possible objection is, well, if you're meek and you're servile and you're taking on the nature of a servant, you're going to become unambitious. You're going to just be passive. You're going to, like you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. Like you're okay with being a servant. And the world believes this because, like we said earlier, it sees the best engine for achievement and economic growth as the ego, feeding our ego with accomplishment, feeding our ego with like earning more so we can buy more, so we can show off more, and that is the driving force of the world's economy, to climb those ladders, to buy that house, to have that retirement. And I cannot imagine that little Christians with a meekness can possibly, like if they really buy into this like idea of being lowly, of being content, of being, there's no way that Christians are going to be able to like work hard. And yet, we find in 1 Corinthians, Paul saying that I have worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. The meek believer is called to work not for praise or profit. The meek Christian is not called to work for recognition, for earnings, for promotions. That we are called to work, not for better grades if you're in school at the moment, or for recognition from your peers or your teachers. The meek Christian is called to work hard because God bids him to do all things, not some things, all things to his glory. And you cannot glorify God with what you know to be mediocre. You cannot glorify God by doing the bare minimum. And so if you truly want to worship God with your work, with your school, with your family raising, with your relationships with your friends, if you truly want to live a life that honors God, you do your best at all times. You have a better boss in God than in yourself. God's grace, and this is from John Piper and Bowering, God's grace in the heart of the humble believer who utterly depends on God produces incredible industry. And so, as we wrap up, just in summary, God calls us to meekness as the antidote to the weariness we feel. Because in meekness, in trusting God to be Lord over our lives as the true object of our worship, we free ourselves from the burdens of pride and allow us to live our most ambitious, our most courageous selves. Let us pray. And I'm going to borrow from Tozer's wonderful prayer. Lord, make me childlike. Deliver me from the urge to compete with another for place or prestige or position. I would be simple and artless as a little child. Deliver me from pose and pretense. Forgive me for thinking of myself. Help me to forget myself and find my true peace in beholding thee. that thou mayst answer this prayer, I humble myself before thee. Lay upon me thy easy yoke of self-forgetfulness, that through it I may find rest.